In this lecture, we will begin our study of human language. We will also compare the sound systems that are common to many human languages to those of, in this case, not only living primates, but extinct primate forms. Let's begin by looking at what makes a language different from a call system or a system of vocalization. According to your author, languages have the following four characteristics. First, language is abstract in nature. Second, it is a symbol system, whether it's verbal or written. Next, it's adaptive. You have probably heard of grammar or systems of grammar, these rules that govern the sounds, the phonemes, the combinations of sounds, the morphologies or the morphemes, and the syntax of a language as being generative. Well, that means it's adaptive. So the third characteristic is that language, human language, is adaptive. And then fourth and finally, and we'll take a closer look at this in just a moment, language is physiologically complex, whether it's the structures that are required and their locations to produce sounds of a predictable or formal fashion, or whether we're talking about the architecture of the brain and the functioning of the brain on a biochemical level. So the fourth quality that is unique to language, as opposed to a call system or system of vocalization, is that it is physiologically complex. There are two other qualities having to do with language as it relates to a system of call or a system of vocalization that I would like to just review with you. We have touched upon these in previous lectures. Human beings are unique among other members of the Primates order because we have rather significant expressions of symbolic behavior. So that's important. And language fits within that topic. The other quality that makes human beings very unique among primates is that we have a culture, and that as a culture, it is not grounded solely on the idea of social modification and role-playing. It is much more abstract than that in terms of how it is shared from one generation to the next. So keep those in mind as we highlight this fourth and final area within our understanding of human culture and human biology. The important quality having to do with human biology that ties in rather strongly to this concept of language, its use, how it's shared from one generation to the next, how it is acquired at a very early age, relates to the human brain. When we take a look at the human brain, we realize that it is, by its nature and how it functions, capable of abstract thought. And when this abstract thought occurs, let's say you're thinking about a particular kind of fruit without the fruit being in front of you, or without you participating in some sort of eating of that fruit, you are participating in a complex or abstract thought. When you're doing that, your brain is functioning asymmetrically, meaning there are bioelectric and biochemical actions and reactions that are occurring throughout the entire brain complex. That is very unique. That level of functioning is not seen anywhere else in the animal kingdom. Then when abstract thought occurs, it really incorporates three very important qualities of the human brain, or traits. First, the surface area of the cortex, this outer covering of the brain, when we look at it in its kind of vacuumous view, is rather large, and it has very complex convolutions, and the overall shape of that cortex and various features within that cortical surface are very unique when we're looking at the human brain in this case. One particular area, in this case important to abstract thought, the Broca's area, is very asymmetrical in terms of how it functions. And then finally, there is specific brain context when we take a look at the production of sounds, the use of sounds, and the applications of combinations of sounds and their meanings to specific events, whether they're behaviors or, in this case, associated actions in relation to an object. The context is very important as well. Where and how the brain functions with regard to, on a biochemical or bioelectrical level, with regard to a specific speech event. This is very important. And this kind of complexity is really important to how human beings for thousands of years have learned and ultimately survived. Let's take a closer look now at the physical features that are required for complex speech. And when I say rather complex speech, what I'm saying is to really accomplish in a very formal and repetitive manner the wide range of speech sounds that are employed in human linguistic traditions. So let's look at the morphology of human speech. We'll start with the larynx, and we're going to touch upon all three of these areas here, but let's focus for a moment on the larynx. And I will be speaking to the image along the right hand side of this particular slide. So the larynx is a hollow muscular organ. It holds the vocal cords and allows air to pass to the lungs. And it also controls pitch and volume. So it's very important in a number of ways with regards to the manipulation of sound in a very controlled fashion. Another location is the pharynx. Now the pharynx is a membrane-lined region within the vocal cavity directly posterior to the nose and mouth. Parts of the consonants in American Standard English and gutturals in languages that, again, Arabic and Hebrew, these are sounds that are produced in the pharynx. And in the next slide, I have an image that will show you where the pharynx is in relation to the larynx. Finally, there's the tongue, and the tongue is a very complex organ. It functions in relation to speech in a number of ways. Chiefly among these ways that I'll be describing here in just a moment, the tongue actually changes the shape of the oral cavity. So as air is passing through that cavity and further being manipulated in a variety of locations, and we'll look at points of articulation in just a moment, the tongue is actually actively manipulating those sounds. It should also be mentioned that the tongue itself is incorporated into some sound production. So when we're, for example, producing velar sounds, we'll talk about a velar sound in just a moment. These are sounds that are made by articulating the body of the tongue. In this case, that you would associate with the center of the oral cavity, with the velum, in a sense. And this produces sounds such as a consonant K or G in American Standard English. We'll take a moment and we'll look at that as we describe different points of articulation. Before looking at points of articulation, let me just speak to the two profile images here and cutaways that are associated with this overhead. Recent craniometric studies comparing Pliocene hominids, and I have a pretty good example of a robust Pliocene hominid, in this case Australopithecus boisei, and existent chimpanzees, and I'm giving you the common chimpan, Troglodytes, have given us some pretty deep understandings with regards to the range of sound that extinct primate forms, such as Australopithecus boisei, could make. And we have a living example in terms of the common chimp. Similar studies have also been done with gorillas, but we have a living example that we can actively test and then relate to the fossil record. One of the most interesting findings that has come out of this research, and there's pretty significant body of research that has looked at sound production in living primates and the implications for the fossil record, really has focused on the degree of flexure in the base of the skull, so that basocranial region we talked about early in the course. And the flexure of that region is really important with regards to two of the three areas that I just highlighted for you in terms of the morphology of speech. In this case, the location and size of the larynx, and then the location of the pharynx. These studies have also suggested corresponding similarities in the morphology of the upper respiratory system of these two forms, even though there is I wouldn't say a significant difference with regards to their overall body size, such as a body mass index, but their body sizes are different. However, the respiratory system is kind of running on a different physiological trajectory with regards to growth and development. So I think some of the data that has come out of studies of the upper respiratory system is also helping us better understand the vocalizing ranges of not only the living chimpanzee populations today, but also these extinct slender apes. Summarizing a pretty significant amount of work, what we have found is that the basocranial flexure of the Australopithecines, especially those of the robust groups or species in this case, are of a nature that tells us that the range of sounds that they could have produced is much larger than what we have with our chimpanzee populations today. In this case, maybe between 15 and 20% larger in terms of the overall phonology of sound types that are produced on a regular or formal basis. However, there are some pretty significant limitations in relation to the human model. What researchers have found when they reconstruct the oral cavity and the upper respiratory system of the robust populations of Australopithecine is that there is a higher position of the larynx than what we have in adult Homo sapiens sapiens. This means that, again, the range of sounds and the manipulation of sound would be somewhat restricted. And correspondingly, the pharynx is smaller in size in and among these larger Australopithecines. Take a moment to identify or familiarize yourself rather with some of these specific qualities or morphological locations or landmarks within the vocal tract of a human being. Closely examine where the pharynx is and the size of the pharynx. Then take a look at the oral cavity and where the velum region is in relation to the tongue. And then take a moment to compare the size of the nasal cavity to the oral cavity and where the alveolar region is. Now let's look at the structure of speech ultimately the structure of language. And we have a few concepts that I would like to really define for you so that you can separate these out and understand them as being distinctly human in nature. First, we have a speech sound. Now, a speech sound is any phonetically distinct unit of sound. That is to say, any unit of sound produced by our voice box along with any and all organs of speech associated with it. And it's, again, the speech sound that is associated with human languages is very complex and very challenging to produce. Humans present biology with a unique example for this phenomenon. Our speech sounds seem endless in terms of how sounds are produced and how we can modify those sounds given a specific context, whether it's meaning or function in the language. Another important concept to keep in mind is what a phoneme is. Now, this is, for our purposes, variations in speech sounds that can be associated with specific meanings or within the function of a language when sounds are being, in a sense, combined into words, for example. So a variation in a speech sound that can be associated with a meaning or a language function. Now, phonemes are also important because they are formal. They're very patterned, they're repetitive. They're something that the listener, the person receiving or the recipient of that language event is anticipating. And linguists analyze phonemes, comparing them across a variety of linguistic and cultural contexts. In English, we have these slightly aspirated sounds, those produced with a slight puff of air as one is taking a breath, such as a P sound, a P, or a T or T sound, or a K. But these can be modified, often due to their change in location. Also their function, meaningful contributions, again, remaining slightly the same. And that's why, more often than not, we will confuse words, combinations of phonemes that begin with some of these similarly produced sound types or speech sound types. In other languages, in some northern indigenous languages such as Ojibwa or Cree, and in most dialects of Chinese, there are distinctions also between aspired sounds and unaspired sounds. And this makes those language traditions different from American Standard English. If you've ever had to learn a language, you realize that aspirated sounds, such as those that I've mentioned, or even unaspired sounds, can have very different meanings and very different functions in different morphemes or combinations of sounds, in this case words. So when phonemes have varying functions in language, they're really considered something new, and linguists refer to allophones in order to distinguish these manipulated phonemes. And again, they're not as common in English. Then finally, all speech sounds have a point or place of articulation within the human throat or mouth. And your author will provide you with a series of diagrams having to do with these points of articulation. I'll go over 3 out of 5 main groupings, and then I have in the final slide of this presentation a chart that will take you through the common speech sounds of American Standard English and the point or place where they're being articulated in the overall physiology of language. So all speech sounds, whether linguistically functional or not, have a point or place of articulation within the human throat or mouth. As I said, we'll talk about 3 in relation to our own language. First, we have labial sounds. These are sounds that require the use of one or both lips of the speaker. We most commonly associate labial sounds with stops, linguistic stops. Now, the letters B, a variant of P, F, V, and M. All of these are considered to be labial sounds. It may seem a bit silly, but take a moment to produce a V sound and think or be very cognizant of the role of one or both of your lips as you're producing that sound, or an M sound. The second group of sounds I'd like to just highlight briefly here are dental sounds. Now, dental sounds involve the upper teeth as a passive articulator, or something that's getting in the way. The active articulator may be either the tongue tip or usually a blade of the tongue, the edge of the tongue, for example. A good example of a dental sound is a TH sound. And then finally, we have velar sounds, or velar contact sounds. Velar sounds are those sounds made by articulating, as I mentioned, the body of the tongue towards the velum in the upper portion of that oral cavity. Examples of such sounds in English are, again, a K sound or a G sound. And then generally we lump sounds within American Standard English into two other groups that are not listed here for you. I really won't describe them extensively, but these would be voice sounds and nasal sounds. In the next slide, take a look at the chart and take a look at some of the examples in American Standard English, and then attempt to have a stronger or deeper understanding of where and how you produce these 5 groupings: labial, dental, velar, voice, and nasal, where you produce them in your own oral cavity. As you take a look at this next slide, you'll also note that there are additional symbols and concepts that are not really part of the curriculum of this class that are presented to you in relation to some of these sounds and the associated morphemes or words that are part of American Standard English. However, you may be interested in this kind of phonetic alphabet and how it is utilized in understanding on a sound or speech sound level our own language. And finally, don't be overwhelmed by the amount of material that this particular slide is presenting to you. Just review it, but focus more on the range or amount of material that is being, in a sense, presented to you in your course text and in the opening slides of this particular lecture. I'll bring more of these ideas together and economize the wealth of knowledge that one could easily gather regarding language in our next lecture.